The story begins in an abandoned construction place in the middle of the night. We see a boy being surrounded by a group of evil people who are armed with dangerous weapons while hanging above a cage full of zombies who are eager to eat the boy. We learn that the boy's name is Jong Zioyong. The woman asks if life is meaningless for him now because all of his friends are dead while she asks that. The cold sweat drips all over his face, and Jong remembers the good times he had in the past with his friends, and says to himself that it is all my fault that you guys ended up like that, and regrets that things went that way. Jong gets mad and screams at the evil woman that she deserves a miserable death, and that how a person can do something like that to fellow humans. The evil woman with a satisfied face is clinging to a man with a good build, and while she does so, she says that Jong is angry at her again. The man suggests to torture him slowly so she can vent her anger at him for having such a foul mouth. The man thanks Jong for the supplies, and because of the supplies they can live a comfortably live for a few more months before the supplies run out. But while he does so, he clicks a button, and so because of that, Jong falls with full force to the ground in the cage full of zombies who immediately get alerted by his presence. The zombies who are starving are running with full speed to Jong, and once they get to Jong they begin to eat him alive, while we see that Jong is coughing up blood because of the damage he is getting. Jong thinks to himself that if he had another chance to live again, he would make better use of it, and that he would make them pay for what they did to him and his friends so that he would never experience something like that again in his life. Jong, who wakes up again after experiencing something terrible, gets called upon by the same evil woman who betrayed him in his previous life, and while the woman screams that he didn't put her name to the house deed, he couldn't grasp the situation he is in right now because he thought to himself that he had died just a second ago. Jong looks around and thinks to himself that could it be that I have been reborn before the time of the apocalypse and that they gave me a chain to redo life. He says that in his last life he has been deceived by Qi Jing. We learn that she stole the inheritance left by his parents and made him homeless, and because of that he had to sleep on the streets in the cold weather. We also learned that later that time a global catastrophe occurred, so because of that most people were turned into zombies and plunging the world into chaos. With the help of friends he survived and built a safe zone to survive the apocalypse until it is safe to walk around again. But he couldn't have known that the deceitful Qi Jing pretended to be a desperate person seeking his refuge and sympathy. In the end, she betrayed him and let the enemy inside to destroy him and his friends. We move back to his house where Qi Jing is screaming at him while saying 400,000 yuan and not a penny less. Jong, with a serious face expression, stays silent while looking at her. The evil woman gets angry and asks if he heard her. Jong thinks to himself that he cannot act impulsively now, so he needs to wait when it is the right moment. The evil woman says that she will give him a week time for him to make everything right, but Jong cuts her off and says fine, I got it, so she needs to go while pushing her to the door. This shocked the evil woman a bit and thinks to herself that when did Jong become so assertive, and asks if he wasn't her lackey before. Jong closes the door and turns around. But while he does so, he looks at the clock and thinks to himself that he must prepare for the impending apocalypse that is going to happen in a month's time, because if he doesn't, the same will happen like last time. Jong gets shocked, and we see a system alert saying the apocalypse system is now active. We also see several system missions saying own a piece of land to get 10 points as system rewards for completing the mission. Jong asks in a surprised tone what those points can be used for once he completes a mission, and how he will be able to use them. We learn that there is a system store displaying different types of items which can be bought with system points he earns from mission rewards. We learn that in his previous life, he saved every penny he got to save up for the evil's woman bride price, which left him malnourished. Jong picks up his phone and gets a message saying, "Are you full?" And he thinks to himself that the zombies will be everywhere in a month's time, so he should eat good food until that happens. We move to an expensive-looking building. We see nice-looking food on the table, and Jong asks to himself if this is the legendary Michelin 3-star expensive takeaway. He wonders what a 300 yuan braised pork tastes like. While he puts the food in his mouth, his face expression turns into happiness after trying it. Then he screams that the food is unbelievably delicious. We see that the neck is enjoying his food like a pig, but gets surprised to hear a message from his phone when he is just enjoying his food. We see that he is being called by the friend of the evil women. He thinks to himself if that manipulative woman cried to her friend again, and sighs at the view of the name on the phone. The friend gets angry at Jong for treating her friend like that, and says that she only wanted him to prove his love to her. She also says that if you can't give her property, how can you love her, which is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. She says that Qi Jing was testing him a little and that he failed miserable, but if he brings 1 million by the end of the day in cash to them, she might help him to get her back to him. Zhang gets angry at her and says, "Who do you think you are for testing me like that?" and that she needs to get lost. The friend is trying to respond, but Zhang ends the call before she can do so. Zhang lays back on the couch and thinks to himself that he will build the strongest fortress on this land where no one dares to come, but not only is it becoming defensive, it is also built next to a water source and forest, so he will not run out of water that easily. We move to a hall full of people who are walking where the Mig gets greeted by a woman while she asks what he is looking for. The Mig tries to respond to the woman, but gets cut off by a man who we learn is the real estate manager of this place. The real estate manager asks the woman to help the others move boxes in the back because they have a lot of toilet paper that needs to be dealt with. The woman tries to respond to her boss, but gets cut off before she could do so. The real estate manager asks if she has forgotten who taught her everything in this field of work, and with an angry tone sends her to the back to help. The manager turns around and says to the Mick that a broke loser in cheap clothes can't even afford a toilet, let alone a house to life in. The Mick, his face expression turns dark and gets angry, so he asks the real estate manager if he is looking down on people or if he is just an evil person. The real estate manager says that he looks down on dogs like him, and he further says that if the Mick can afford a toilet, he will live stream himself eating shit. Zhang says to the real estate manager that he will find some fresh, hot, steaming ones for him later to eat on stream. Zhang comes back to business and tells the lady worker that he is not here to buy a house, but to buy land for himself, saying this with a confident face. The real estate manager and the lady worker can't believe their eyes when Zhang pulls out a black pay card, and cold sweat drips from their faces. Every customer in the building is shocked beyond belief, so they are asking what Zhang means by buying land and if he knows how much money it will take to purchase a piece of land. Another customer explains that he has never seen anyone buy land so easily. They exclaim that Zhang must be a wealthy person to buy such expensive land. The lady worker still cannot believe her eyes and asks Zhang to please follow her because she will give him the best detailed introduction available. While they are walking away, the real estate manager, with an annoyed expression, says that everyone knows how to brag, but he is not capable of paying for such expensive land. Zhang takes a seat on a chair provided by the lady worker, who further explains that these are the land pieces they currently have available, so Zhang needs to look carefully at which piece of land he wishes to buy. Zhang explains that there is no need to do so, and that he will just explain what kind of requirements he needs for his land. After that, she will need to look for the land that fits his requirements. Zhang further explains his requirements, such as proximity to mountains and water, so he has a water source. He also specifies that it needs to have convenient transportation and should have large buildings on top of it. The lady worker thinks hard before she answers, but is interrupted by the real estate manager, who adds that there is a piece of land in the East District that fits Zhang's requirements. The lady worker asks in a surprised tone why he suggests the East District, as there are still unfinished factory projects there and they cannot sell such land to a client. The real estate manager becomes angry and says that this broke loser's requirements are outrageous and that he is not here to buy an expensive piece of land, but to cause trouble for them. Yang is surprised to hear that there is a piece of land that fits his requirements and asks the lady worker for confirmation. She responds positively but further explains that there are still unfinished factory projects because the construction team leader ran off, and there is no one to finish the work in time. Zhang thinks to himself that it is a great location because it fits all of his requirements. He further says that if he puts up barbed wire, it will be easy to defend, and the unfinished factories will also save him a lot of money. Zhang tells the lady worker that he will take that piece of land and would like to make a contract now so he can pay right away. The lady worker takes the papers back from Zhang and says in a scared tone that they are sorry for offering something like that. However, after she hears his response, she gets a shocked expression on her face and asks Zhang if he really plans to buy land with unfinished projects. Zhang confirms that he does and says that someone is waiting to eat some fresh poop later, so they should hurry with the contract and down payment, while the real estate manager is sweating cold drops of sweat. A while later, we see the real estate manager holding a receipt and saying that it is impossible. He further says with a dumbfounded face that he really paid a $300,000 down payment and questions how someone can buy such expensive land with unfinished projects on it. Jong explains to the real estate manager, who still cannot believe his eyes, that he made the down payment and that it is up to him to perform in front of the camera, so he should at least enjoy it. Having had enough, Jong walks away, while other customers tell the real estate manager that they have turned on the live stream, so he needs to hurry up. Another customer adds that his stomach doesn't feel good, but promises that it will be fresh for him. Jong thinks to himself that he has spent all the bride money on buying that piece of land, but now he needs to figure out how to get money to stockpile supplies for himself. As Jong ponders, a fat man walks past him and wonders if that was indeed Jang. The fat man continues to his destination, but is surprised to see the real estate manager being forced to eat poop after making a deal with Jong. The real estate manager, in a state of shock, protests that he doesn't want to eat poop, but the people ignore him and keep putting the poop in his mouth. The fat man, now angry, exclaims about what the hell is happening in his absence. We then move to the evil woman, who is meticulously doing her nails. She receives a call from the fat man and answers, greeting him and asking if he remembers her. The fat man cuts her off, asking if she knew that Jong went to the real estate company to buy an expensive piece of land. The evil woman gets upset and asks how a broke loser like Jong could afford something so costly. The fat man explains that it was a $300,000 down payment, so he must have used the bride money. The evil woman becomes even more upset, fuming about how Jong could use her money, but the fat man calms her down and tells her she needs to figure out what's going on with him. The evil woman says that she will expose Jong online for using her money, and for doing so behind her back. We then return to Jong, who thinks to himself that buying supplies and building a base requires a lot of money, and he doesn't know where he can get such an amount when he's broke. Suddenly, there's a loud bang on the door, which surprises Jong. It turns out to be the evil woman with her friend. Jong asks what they are doing there, but the evil woman cuts him off, accusing him of spending her money behind her back. Jong is dumbfounded and asks what she means, but the evil woman insists that she knows everything, including how he used her bride money to buy a piece of land, and since it was her money, the land now belongs to her. Jong becomes angry and asks if she has suddenly gone crazy. He explains that he has plenty of money while slapping her with a stack of cash. As the evil woman looks on in disbelief, Jong makes it clear that he will never give her anything and asks if he's dumb for knowing that she has been having an affair with the fat man for a long time. The evil woman begins to sweat coldly, wondering how Jong found out about the affair. Her friend jumps in, saying that it's just a misunderstanding between a couple and that they need to take it easy. Jong interrupts, stating that there is no misunderstanding and that a cheating woman like her is not his girlfriend. He tells her to go back to the fat man and, irritated by her presence, slams the door in their faces. The evil woman, left outside, thinks to herself about how Jang knows about the affair since they were very discreet when booking rooms. The evil woman and her friend start to leave, but the friend stops her and asks if Jong told the truth about her affair with the fat man and why she didn't mention it before they confronted Jong. The evil woman uses the excuse that they only booked a room a few times. The friend, concerned about how everything has spiraled out of control, suggests that they should go back and come up with a plan to handle Jong. The evil woman agrees, saying that it is the only thing they can do at the moment. However, the friend thinks to herself that since the evil woman messed up with Jong, she now has a chance to claim Jong for herself. After all, they are good sisters, but she's not holding back. We then move back to the construction site where Jong has bought the land. Jong is asking a middle-aged man how long the renovations will take to complete. The middle-aged man, clearly perplexed, asks Jong what kind of force he has offended to require such extensive renovations. Jong explains that he doesn't need to know the details and that asking too many questions isn't helpful. He then inquires about the cost to complete the work within a month. The middle-aged man tries to explain that it's impossible to finish in a month, but is cut off by Jong, who says that if he doesn't want to do it, he'll find someone who will. The middle-aged man reluctantly agrees, but clarifies that his concern isn't the timeline, but the cost that will need to be paid. Jong asks what the price will be, and the middle-aged man explains that because the construction needs to be expedited and the work intensity will increase, the cost will need to be at least this amount. Jong, surprised, asks if $20 million is enough. The middle-aged man confirms that it is and adds that Jong needs to pay a $5 million deposit before they can start building. Jong says he will transfer the money within a week and instructs them to hurry up with the construction. The middle-aged man tries to respond, but is cut off by Jong, who adds that if the deposit isn't paid, the land will be his, so the man shouldn't worry about the payment. The middle-aged man agrees and acknowledges Jong's terms. Suddenly, the friend of the evil woman calls out to Jong. He turns around with a confused look on his face. The friend clings to Jong's arm and asks him what he is doing there. As the crazy witch's friend clings to Jong innocently, she asks him what he's doing there. Jong looks down at her in anger and remembers that she was the one who persuaded the crazy woman to swindle him out of his family's property in his past life. He swore to pay her back twice the misery he suffered, with his face still filled with rage. The friend, on the other hand, was still asking what he was doing there while trying to act like a good girl. She asked him if this was the land he bought and complimented the scenery, calling it a very nice place. She then asked if he planned to build there, while desperately squeezing her melons against his arms. Jong pushed her away and told her that whatever he was building had nothing to do with her. The girl was completely shocked at his actions. She didn't think a pathetic loser would have the mind to push away a hot chick like her. She asked herself what was going on and didn't understand why Jong was acting so weird that day. In a normal circumstance, just touching her hand would make him blush and his heart race. But now he was completely irritated by her presence. Even after deliberately caressing his hands, he still had no reaction towards her. While she was angry and nervous, Jong went ahead to talk with the construction workers and told them that the gates needed to be expanded. The crazy girl's friend called out to him, but he just ignored her like a piece of garbage. Since he had broken up with Kiwi Juing, the friend didn't want to miss the opportunity to take Jong for herself. She saw it as a golden opportunity for the land to be hers. She gritted her teeth and clutched her hand in desperation as she thought about how to make things work in her favor. Back at Jong's home, he sat down on his couch with the documents of his newly bought land laid out on the table. He said that he had pledged the house to the bank, but it only got him $3 million, which wasn't nearly enough for the first phase of the construction. He needed to figure out how to get more money into his broke pockets. With a serious look on his face, he thought that since the apocalypse was coming soon, it wouldn't matter if he sold the house multiple times, and then concluded that he would do just that. Suddenly, he heard loud bangs at his door and a voice yelling at him to open it. As he walked to open the door, he said the voice belonged to his downstairs neighbor, Grandpa Lai. The old, rickety man was a nuisance who had some money, and he owned the first and second floors of the building where Jian lived. Lai also wanted to buy Jong's third floor, but the house was meant to be his matrimonial home, which was why he didn't want to sell it. As Jong grabbed the door handle, he said that the old man was always causing a ruckus, splashing paint, dumping garbage, placing funeral wreaths, and jamming the locks. He opened the door, and Grandpa Lai immediately accused him of going clubbing the previous night. Jong yelled back at the man and asked if he was done with his silly theatrics. He told the man that he went to bed before 10 last night, so there was no way he could have gone clubbing. Lai said that he didn't care and that he heard something, but Jong cut him off and told the old man to stop his annoying rambling. He was fed up with Lai and his crazy stunts. Since the old man wanted the house, Jong said that he'd sell it to him. The old man was completely stunned and asked Jong if he was really serious. Jong looked down at the monkey-faced old man and said that he'd sell it on one condition, and Lai asked what it was. He told the old man that his new house wouldn't be ready until after 6 months, so he needed to stay there for that amount of time. Before that, the old man would have to pay him a total of $5 million for the house all at once. With that, he'd be able to pay off the loan on his new house. Lai was about to respond, but Jong cut him off and said that if he didn't agree, then he should forget it, while slowly closing his door. Lai stopped the door, pushed his head in, and nervously said that they'd have to sign a contract to avoid any regrets. Jong looked really irritated as he looked at the ugly old man and told him that the contract wouldn't be a problem. Of course, with a plague coming in a month's time, Jong had successfully swindled the old fool. He closed his door and cursed the old man out, telling him to stay in his house and wait to meet his maker. Jong began going through his phone, calculating the old man's 5 million together with the 3 million loan, which came to a total of 8 million. The system popped up and showed that he had completed the first task of owning a piece of land. With that, he claimed the system's reward. The next day, he went into the city to complete the next task, which was to get a year's worth of supplies. He breezed through the shopping mall, collecting many items that could be useful to him. The people there thought he was deranged, and some even said the foolish boy should be avoided. They all stood and watched him as he filled numerous carts with supplies that would last him a year. They didn't understand what he was going to do with all that stuff, and some of them even called him a pathetic idiot who believed in doomsday rumors. Jong wasn't bothered by their comments because he already knew what was coming. By the time he had gathered all the items, the task was completed, and the system rewarded him with 10 points. As he looked through the system store, he thought about how enhancing attributes would be useful during the apocalypse, but he was too broke for that. The protagonist supply box was the best thing for him to get with his 10 points. Jong had a pumped-up look on his face as he convinced himself to get the protagonist supply box and expand his advantage immediately. He bought the box, and his 10 points were deducted. The supply box popped out with an infinity symbol on the top of it and question marks around its body. When the box gets unlocked, we see the system information pop up and tell him that he got a level 1 space ring. The ring had a huge spatial space of 500 cubic meters, and time in the space was static. Jong knew the first item he was going to get would be a gold one. With the time-static properties of the ring, it meant that fresh food wouldn't spoil. Jong was happy about this information because he was a good-for-nothing idiot who didn't know how to cook for himself. After that, the system brought up his next task and told him to get supplies for 10 years, with the reward for that being 20 points. As that happened, the store manager walked out with some guards and asked who was causing trouble in his store. He looked like a mangy mutt as he asked Jong to identify himself. Jong recognized him as Yang Tao, his middle school classmate, and a dumb lackey of the school bully, Zhang Shengzhi. Yang always liked to bully weaker people, but couldn't stand up to those stronger than him. We see that in the past, Yang and a couple of other dumb-looking idiots bullied Jong and asked him for a protection fee. During that encounter, Jong told them to screw off, and that Sheng should come collect the money if he wants it. Anyway, he was surprised to run into the same blockhead at the store, much less as a manager. Yang told him to return all the items he put in his cart or else. Jong cut him off and mocked him for still bullying weak people and acting like a useless wimp in front of those stronger than him. He told Yang that he was there to make a purchase and asked if that was how Hurenfa treated its customers. Yang thought he was crazy for actually saying he was going to purchase all those items. He told Yang to pay for them immediately or else he would get rough-handled. An hour later, all his items were scanned, and the cashier printed out the total. As Yang was told the total price by the cashier, he handed out the payment terminal to Jong and yelled at him to pay immediately. With a spark of confidence in his eyes, Jong swiped his card as if he were in a battle. The transfer was successful, but Yang didn't look too happy about that. As he walked away with his guards, Jong called him back. Yang was already pissed off enough, and he asked Jong what he was doing. Jong told him to apologize for his rude behavior, or else he would return all the goods that he just purchased. The store manager felt insulted and told Jong not to push his luck, but the other customers interrupted him and told him to apologize. They told the blockhead that an apology wasn't much, and if he didn't, they wouldn't let it go. One of them had even started recording and was ready to make Yang a famous piece of shit. Jong told him again to apologize, and if he did, Jong said he would buy 10 times the amount of items he had already bought. Yang didn't believe his words, so Jong told him to bring the POS machine so he could show his balance. He swiped his card on it, and Yang was shocked to see that the pathetic weakling he knew had over 7 million. It was an amount that he had never attained in his wretched life. Once again, Jong told him to apologize. With no choice, Yang bowed down like a peasant and said he was sorry. As he bowed, Jong patted him on the head and told him not to be so reckless in the future and to leave room for others. Yang had an utterly defeated look on his face, but he couldn't retaliate since it would only bring more trouble for him. He asked Jong what he was doing with all the things he bought, and the Mick said he was planning a big venture. Yang told him that the supermarket's inventory wouldn't be enough for his venture and that he needed a wholesaler. Zhang turned back his head and asked Yang if he knew some wholesalers since he worked at the store. Surprisingly, the wholesaler he knew was Sheng, the dumb bully who always extorted Zhang in school. Yang quickly called Sheng and told him that he had found a big client. Zhang looked disappointed at the fact that Yang was still Sheng's useless slave. He wondered how much gray income the two of them could have made in the supermarket. After that, Zhang and Yang went to a warehouse. A badass car swiftly drove in and nearly turned Yang into a cadaver. Zhang was angry at how arrogant the driver was. The driver, Sheng, stepped out of the car, smoking a cigarette and puffing the smoke clouds in the air. Yang introduced him to Zhang and asked if he remembered him from their high school days. Sheng proved that all the smoke had clogged up his ears as he made Yang repeat himself. He finally said that he remembered who Zhang was and blew smoke on his face. He referred to Zhang as the guy with a bit of a backbone. He tugged at Zhang's hoodie drawstring and called it a fake designer brand. Sheng said he hated people like him who pretended to be rich when they weren't. Zhang replied by saying that he didn't know if it was a designer brand and that he just bought it from a random store. Sheng grabbed Yang's head and yelled at him for bringing such a useless guy as a client. He told Yang that his time was wasted with Zhang's presence and kicked him in the butt. Yang tried to explain that his client was a really big one, but Sheng didn't believe the idiot's words. He said that he could tell who was rich, and he wasn't because he had been in the business for many years. But it was obvious that his brain and eyes were also clogged up from his rubbish cigarettes. Zhang felt his aura wasn't working and said that he couldn't intimate illiterates like Sheng Ji, who looked down on people. Sheng arrogantly grabbed him by the collar and told him to repeat what he just said. But Zhang wasn't fazed by the fool. Zhang repeated himself and said that he looked down on people, but Sheng focused on the part where he was called illiterate. Zhang took it that he didn't mind being told that he looked down on people. Yang then tried to calm down the situation and said that Sheng's sore spot was when people called him illiterate because he really was one, and he hated being called that the most. Sheng kicked him to the side like a trash can and told him to shut up since he could talk so well. Then he threatened Zhang by saying that he wouldn't leave there standing if he didn't buy a truckload of goods. Zhang whipped out his phone and told the dumb bully to stop tugging on his collar and show him the account he was going to pay to. Seconds later, he wired $1 million to Sheng, who was surprised to see such an amount of money. He looked completely baffled as he read the transfer details on his phone. Zhang let him know that there was no other reason for him to be there. He said he was going to buy $5 million worth of goods. Then he told Sheng to load up the truck with the rest, and he would pay the balance when the goods were ready. Sheng asked him what kind of goods he wanted, and he replied, saying it was rice, salt, and basically anything that was edible or drinkable. He wanted it all. Then Sheng, with a sly smile on his face, told Zhang to follow him. Unknown to Zhang, Sheng planned to give him a batch of food that was nearly expired. They went into the warehouse, where it was filled with barrels and crates of different kinds of supplies. Sheng offered to give him a 10% discount if he took the whole batch. He was going to stoop to any level to get the goods off his hands. Zhang told him it would depend on the quality of the goods as he walked towards the crates. He got to one of the crates, picked up a brown bag, and began to analyze the item. Looking closely at it, he told Shizheng that everything was nearly expired, except for the outermost layer. Zhang called him a shrewd man for trying to set him up like that. Sheng was surprised that he was able to figure it out. Caught between a rock and a hard place, he then offered Zhang a 50% discount. Zhang told him that there was no need because he was only using the $5 million to buy the best quality goods. He then said that he had other plans for the expired goods, and Sheng wondered what this crazy guy was talking about. Zhang was going to take the nearly expired goods at the 50% discount, but the payment would arrive a month later. Sheng asked what would happen if the goods expired, and he didn't get his payment. But Zhang assured him that he would mortgage his house to him if that happened. Sheng was still curious as to why someone would buy that many nearly expired goods. He asked Zhang what his channel was, to which Zhang replied that the channel was himself. Zhang told him that even expired goods would be worth a fortune in a few days, as he tapped Sheng's shoulder. A cold sweat ran down Sheng's face, and he looked like he had already shit on himself. With a shaky voice, he asked Zhang what he meant. But Zhang told him to stop asking questions and just deliver the goods, and that he would send him the address later. Zhang suddenly got a call, and the voice over the phone asked if he was selling his second-hand house. As he left to take the call, he told Sheng that he had other matters to attend to and that he should take care of the food. He then walked out of the warehouse. Yang, who had been a complete nuisance, asked Sheng if he had scammed him. But Sheng wondered how Zhang was doing so well since his family was short of anything special. Zhang got back home and met Grandpa Lai, who gave him a bag full of money as a deposit. The old man accepted his condition to leave the house in 3 months and asked to sign the contract immediately. Zhang just looked at the old fool and said that he didn't even inspect the house before making a deposit. He was puzzled as to why Lai was so desperate to get the house and asked the old man why he was in such a hurry. Lai, with a sad look on his face, told Zhang that his granddaughter needed to transfer schools, so they urgently needed the house for residency. He had been looking around the area, but only Zhang's house was up for sale, and he begged Zhang not to back out of their deal. Zhang called out the silly man's honesty and asked if he wasn't afraid that he would raise the price after hearing what he just said. Grandpa Lai was shocked at Zhang's words, and he looked like he could have had a heart attack at any moment. He told Zhang that buying the house would cost him their entire family's savings, but Zhang assured him that he wasn't going to back out. After that, they signed the contract, and Lai was relieved that his granddaughter wouldn't have to sleep in the streets like a gutter rat. He bowed like a peasant before leaving and left Zhang to attend to more important matters. As he left, Zhang thought the old man's kind and honest traits would be his doom during the apocalypse. He quickly stopped the man for a second and asked for Lai to give him the address of where he currently lived. The next day, Zhang returned to the construction site to see how his new place was coming along. As he got there, the construction manager asked for the second batch of funds like a hungry ingrate, but Zhang told him that he would transfer the funds soon. The construction manager showed him around the place as they walked inside the building and said that it was between 70 and 80% complete. They stood under the reinforced doors and walls, and he assured Zhang that they were absolutely safe. Zhang asked about the warehouse and was told that it had already been cleaned up and was ready to be used. With that information, he called Sheng with a happy look on his face and told the dumb bully to bring the goods. Moments later, workers began to fill up the warehouse with boxes of supplies. They happily did their work because their boss was paying each person a lot of money. They were a bunch of broke fools, and they needed some way to sustain themselves in their miserable lives, which was about to be cut short by the apocalypse. They commented on how the place looked like a shelter and said that rich people really valued their lives. Zhang directed them and told them to make sure that the perishable goods were stored separately. After a work-filled day, the underpaid interns started leaving the warehouse when night came. As they left, Zhang stood in front of his tower of supplies and was happy to be done with that task. The system showed that he completed the task of acquiring 10 years' worth of supplies and rewarded him with 20 points. As Zhang looked through the system's store, he noticed that there was a new box item there. It was a box that would give him an awakening ability. Zhang was happy at the fact that he would be able to gain abilities before the dawn of the apocalypse since he was a good-for-nothing weakling. He quickly purchased the box, and it gave him the ability known as the Mind's Eye. It would help to detect if another party was hostile or had harmful intentions. Zhang said that it was one of the most useful abilities in the early days of the apocalypse. He would easily be able to tell friends from foe and deal with them accordingly. After that, the system popped his next mission, which was to arm himself. Zhang had a mischievous look on his face as he said that was what he had in mind. It was nighttime at the market, and all sorts of vendors and customers could be seen prancing about, looking for the next best rare item to purchase. For a bunch of fools who were clueless about the apocalypse, everyone there seemed to be eager to get something important. Zhang walked through the streets of the market as he listened to the idle chatter of everyone around. Customers were trying to determine if items were real or fake, and the vendors were tired of dealing with annoying idiots. They all had stern looks on their faces, as if they were all trying not to be intimidated. Zhang's attention was caught by someone who was trying to haggle like a thief. The customer wanted an item for $300, but the vendor couldn't believe the sheer stupidity and asked who did business like that. When he turned back, he saw that the idiotic customer was none other than Lai Shuxing. The fat piece of shit was trying to bring the price of an item from 2,000 to 300. He threatened to leave if the vendor wasn't going to sell it to him at that price. The vendor, trying his best not to punch the idiotic fool in the throat, was trying to calm things down so that they could come to an agreeable price. Eventually, he agreed to sell it to Shuxing at that ridiculous price, just to get him to stop yelling. One of the random people on the streets looked at the vendor as if he were a complete noob who had no spine to stand his ground. Zhong was curious as to why Shuxing was buying fake bracelets on the black market. For someone who likes to brag a lot, Shuxing was nothing but a cheapskate and a silly one at that. He called his crazy ex-girlfriend, Qiui Jing, a fool for falling for a scam. The way he stared at Shuxing showed that he was irritated by the guy's presence. He went back to looking for more items and saw a display of fine swords and machetes. Each blade looked like it could take anyone's head off with ease, but it wasn't just him who stared at the blades with such intent. There were other people passing by who seemed to like slicing and dicing things. Zhong smiled and was happy that he found what he was looking for. He met with the vendor and began examining the blades. With the way he held one of the blades, you'd think this nincompoop actually had experience as a swordsman. Zhong asked the vendor if he had any hard stuff there, and by hard stuff, I'm pretty sure he wasn't talking about their sausages. Anyway, the vendor didn't want to waste time with a loser like Zhong, so he showed the knife sharpener to him and told him to get to work if he wanted something hard. The vendor said that he could also buy a baton if he was too lazy to sharpen the blade himself. Zhong, with a mean look on his face, still insisted that it wasn't hard enough and he needed something harder. Yeah, this whole conversation was getting really sus. The vendor felt annoyed by Zhong's words and questioned if he was there to cause trouble. He had a camouflage jacket on, which gave the impression that he was a veteran who was skilled in taking care of wastes like Zhong. His facial expression changed when he suddenly got a credit alert on his phone. Zhong had transferred a substantial amount of money to the vendor, and this calmed him down. The vendor was shocked to see how much an ugly kid sent to him, and he couldn't believe it. Zhong, with a happy expression, showed that it was he who transferred the money and told the vendor to pipe down. He was serious about getting something hard to satisfy himself. You know what I mean? After that, the vendor told his assistant, Xiaoxiang, to watch the stall, while he directed Zhong to somewhere private where he could get the hard stuff he'd been craving. He said that talking outside was inconvenient and pointed the way to Zhong. Rather than a warehouse, they went to what looked like a casual person's home. I guess he was serious about giving Zhong that hard stuff. I'm just joking. When they got inside the building, the vendor showed him different kinds of homemade guns enough to at least kill chickens, and they were quite cheap too. The ammo and gunpowder were also cheap, but Zhong said it still wasn't good enough for him. At this point, the vendor thought Zhong was just an annoying crackhead. The look on his face said he was tired of dealing with such an annoying customer. He then showed Zhong a replica revolver, and its performance was almost the same as an active-duty handgun. Regardless, it was still stupidly cheap. It was obvious he was trying to sell cheap stuff and keep a huge amount of change for himself. Zhong was furious as he looked down on the vendor and told him that it still wasn't acceptable. He had paid the vendor a lot of money, so all this cheap stuff only got him irritated and upset. He told the vendor that the 200,000 that was sent was just a prepayment. The vendor thought this sick kid had lost his mind, but Zhong, with a stone look on his face, said he was buying weapons worth 2 million. What kind of apocalypse could this loser possibly be preparing for? The vendor had to ask what he did for a living because no normal person would come to purchase that much heavy weaponry. He was probably scared for his meager life as well and didn't want to get on Zhong's bad side. Zhong basically threw his question aside, saying that it was his subordinates who usually handled trivial matters and the vendor didn't need to ask many questions. Seeing how serious Zhong was, the vendor went to lock the doors and close the windows to make sure no one could see or hear them. Luckily, Zhong didn't get defiled after that. The vendor told him that he had come to the right person. He whispered to Zhang that he would give him an address and also told him to write a list. Zhong was to go to the location the day after tomorrow at midnight to complete the transaction, and he was meant to bring cash. As he left the building, he heard the fat fool, Shuxing, calling his name. Just the sound of the idiot's voice made Zhong look like he was going to throw up. Shuxing was surprised to see him on the black market and said that must be why he had been spending lavishly recently. The foolish degenerate obviously wanted all that money for himself. He also called out Zhang for ignoring Jing and also said that his family must have had some heirlooms. He assumed Zhang was there to sell off his inheritance and said he had been watching too many marketing accounts recently, in a mocking tone. Zhang didn't even look bothered by Shuxing's degrading statements. Rather, he saw it as the perfect time to test his mind's eye ability. He activated it, and a blue flame surrounded his eye. He was able to see different icons on the top of the vendor and Shuxing's heads. The icon on the vendor's head looked friendly, while that of Shuxing showed he was definitely an enemy. Zhang was glad that the ability worked as expected. He turned back and began to mock the fat piece of garbage, saying that he must have tricked Ku Jing by buying fake and second-hand goods in order to clap her cheeks. Zhang said that she was just his second hand, who was worth the fake items. Shuxing was infuriated by Zhang's words, but he made no attempt to deny that he was a broke loser who had to buy cheap items to clap a girl. The vendor asked Zhang if they knew each other, and Zhang said that the fat fool was an enemy. Thanks to the money he was offered, the vendor began acting like Zhang's silly lackey and said that he'd handle Shuxing, while Zhang went ahead to handle other matters. The rest of his dumb friends came out to tag along in the drama, and Zhang told him not to kill the fatso since he still had plans for him. Shuxing was already shaking like a chihuahua as the goons slowly walked toward him. He tried to put up a tough attitude, but it was no use. The arms dealer swung out a baton, which made Shuxing try to negotiate with them. The proud fool was now a sacred wimp, and he had probably pissed on himself. The arms dealer and the rest of the goons gave Shuxing the beating of a lifetime. Laying defeated on the floor, Shuxing swore to get back at Zhang for humiliating him. 2 days later, in the dead cold of night, Zhang unveiled his new guns, which were delivered in a truck at his warehouse. With his new arms acquired, his task was complete, and he was awarded 10 points by the system. As a bonus reward, he was also given 2 physical enhancement potions. Rather than an actual potion, it was basically just a syringe, which meant that the system was obviously forcing this guy to do drugs. Anyway, Zhang noticed that the potion's effectiveness was as good as the one in the store. He brought out one of his hands and lifted the other in the air as he got ready to inject it into his body. As he used the potions, he gritted his teeth in pain, and his eyes went completely white. It was either he was feeling ecstatic like a junkie who just got his daily dose, or this idiot was about to die. Luckily, his second chance at life wasn't about to be wasted so easily. According to him, the average adult male had a strength of 5, but with the added 2 points from the potion, he got a 40% increase. He rolled up his fists as if trying to get a good feel of his new strength, but he still looked like the same old useless loser. Still, it wasn't enough for him. Zhang opened up the system's store and looked through the 2 items that were left. He decided to maximize his advantage by buying an extra physical enhancement potion. While injecting himself, he winced like a little girl who was getting touched inappropriately. The extra potions brought him to a total of 8 points, and he had 60% more power than the average person. All that was left was to find a punching bag to test his new powers on. He looked to the wall by his side and saw some bags of cement and a couple of rods on the floor. As he picked up one of the rods, he looked like he was still unsure about his new powers, but there was only one way to find them. He pulled out some sweet Bruce Lee moves as he kicked the rod, bending it and sending it flying towards the wall, which also cracked the wall. With his new strength, Zhang felt like a big bad boss who was not to be messed with in any way. He was sure that he would be able to easily handle early-stage zombies when they showed up. After that, he decided to store the guns in the space ring since they wouldn't take up much space there. The weapon crate shrunk and flew into the ring as if they were being sucked in by a black hole. The day after tomorrow was going to be the first day of the apocalypse, so Zhang was trying to make sure that there was nothing else he had to do. Flashing through his mind was the memory of Grandpa Lai, telling him about his granddaughter and how they needed his house for residency. Zhang felt stupid that he couldn't completely ignore the old man's unfortunate situation, even after suffering at the hands of human treachery. He decided to send the man some essential supplies for the apocalypse, but it was up to the old fool to survive or become a tombstone. Zhang said it was going to be his repayment to the old man for funding his apocalypse plan. The next day, a black car pulled into what looked like an abandoned neighborhood. Jung stepped out of the car and said that whoever was going to look for this filthy slum definitely needed some kind of GPS. He had to walk all the way to the top floor where Grandpa Lai was staying so that he could deliver the supplies. From the looks of it, the old man was a broke fool, and Jung said he had a screw loose in his head for living in such a cheap place. Before knocking on the door, he remembered to take out the supplies from the space ring first, so he wouldn't have to get into a long explanation with the old man. After setting out all the boxes, he knocked on the door, and Lai crawled with his rickety legs to open it. As he opened the door, he already started saying that he would pay his rent by next Monday, but he had no idea who he was talking to at first. It was obvious that there were barely any working brain cells left in the man's head. Seconds later, his eyes sparked open, and he recognized that the person in front of him was Jong. He was even more surprised to see the huge number of boxes that surrounded Jong. It's as if his eyes finally started working well, and he asked Jong what all the boxes were for. Jong said he'd explain later and asked the man to help move all the boxes into his home. They had to be discreet about it so that the nosy neighbors wouldn't think they were doing something illegal. Jong ended up doing most of the moving because the old man was an incompetent piece of garbage. Lai wished he was like the young folk because of how much stamina they had. He said young folk like Jong could move so much stuff in one go without being out of breath. But I'm pretty sure moving just one box nearly sent him 6 feet under. When they were done, check the room and the door to make sure it was sturdy enough. While he was still looking around, he told Lai to listen well to what he was about to say. The old man's eyes and memory were barely working well. He was definitely expecting too much if thought that Lai's ears would be working normally. Jong told Lai that he should use the supplies wisely and that they would last him for half a year. Then a picture caught his attention, while the old man was telling Jong to keep the supplies in his room because they would be moving in soon. Jong didn't even pay any attention to the old man's words. He had given him the supplies, so if the old man wanted to continue being a fool, Jong wasn't going to be bothered. The photo that caught his attention showed Grandpa Lai and a very beautiful, brown-haired young lady. He immediately recognized the pretty girl as Shanshan, probably one of the girls he had clapped in his previous life. Jong didn't think she'd be the crazy old man's granddaughter. He asked Lai if his granddaughter was named Meng Shanshan, and Lai was surprised that he knew who his granddaughter was. He asked Jong how he knew, considering that he had never mentioned her name to him before. Jong's face suddenly turned very cold and serious as he asked Lai where Shanshan was. Now that his hot chick was in the picture, he couldn't possibly abandon her and her grandfather. Lai told him that she was still studying back in their hometown, but once they were able to move into Jong's house, she would come around. In a flashback, we see Jong and Shanshan sitting together, while she puts her head down and cries like an annoying brat. She complained about being the one who caused trouble for her grandfather. Jong had a sad look on his face as the scenes flashed through his mind. He remembered that in his past life, Shanshan said her grandfather risked his life to rescue her from the captured high school. The old man was able to save her, but he met his maker afterward. With that in mind, Jong swore to make it up to her so the same events wouldn't be repeated. He was determined to survive and make babies with her this time around. He told Grandpa Lai that he couldn't move houses anymore. Lai had a shocked expression and probably thought that Jong had completely lost his mind. He thought Jong was going to change his mind and begged the boy to reconsider his decision. But Jong told him that the world was going to fall into ruin the next day and humans were going to be plunged into a cesspit of suffering. The house and his granddaughter's school status weren't going to matter in the face of all this. The old man was confused by Jong's words. He had a perplexed look on his face, thinking that Jong was probably the one with dead brain cells. Either that or the boy was mentally disturbed. Jong told him to guide them to the school where Shanshan was so that they could pick her up, and he would have a new place arranged for them. The only expression that ran through Lai's face was confusion and fear. He told Jong that he sounded like a deranged idiot, and that he had no idea what Jong was talking about. This wasn't making things easy for Jong. He needed to look for a way to explain things to the stupid old man, but he was too old to understand anything, and they were running out of time. He had a very worried expression on his face as he thought about how to handle this. He began to explain the concept of hunger to the old man, something the broke fool should have been quite experienced with. Zhang explained how miserable and terrible the people in the famine era would be. Grandpa Lai didn't understand how such a tragedy could befall those in such a peaceful and prosperous world. He didn't believe such a thing would be possible in their time. With no other choice, Zhang pulled out his ring and sucked all the supplies back into the spatial dimension. The old man was frightened as this happened, and he didn't even know what to say. In the blink of an eye, all the items were gone from the room. Lai asked him what happened to the items and assumed it was some kind of dark magic. A powerful aura surrounded Zhang, and in a forceful tone, he told the old man that he had superpowers and that he could see the future. He said he wanted to live, and he also wanted Shanshan to live so they could make all kinds of happy noises together. Then he stated that from then onwards, everything was going to be done according to his words, and Lai would not be able to defy him. He demanded to be told where Shanshan's school was because there was barely any time left. They left the house and got into Zhang's car, but Lai was still looking at him as if he were an insane villain. They sped through the streets and quickly arrived at the school. Zhang asked the old man if he knew Shanshan's class and dormitory. Luckily, the old man knew, which made him quite useful. I can't imagine the horrors Zhang would have put him through if he decided to be incompetent. They hurried to wherever she was, with the clock ticking away fast. Meanwhile, in the middle of the school, we see a bunch of delinquents harassing a girl for some silly reason. The girl who was being harassed was Shanshan, and she was getting whooped by some illiterate bullies because they were jealous that a guy liked her. Rather than trying to get some good Riz skills so the guy could notice them, they decided to take it out on the poor girl. Shanshan was looking bruised up, and she tried to explain that the guy, Zheng Xiaochen, was the one who liked her, and it was all one-sided. Sadly, the stupid bullies were too dumb to understand, and they thought she was just making excuses. They kicked her and pulled her hair to make up for their low self-esteem. They didn't believe that Xia Cheng was the one desperately trying to get into Shanshan's pants, and they felt she was silly for mocking him. Shanshan made some happy noises as her hair got pulled. I guess that's the kind of thing she was into. A voice called out to the stupid bullies and asked them what they were doing, but the girls looked unimpressed by whoever showed up. Luckily for Shanshan, it was Zhang and her grandfather who came to save her. One of the bullies recognized Lai as the useless grandfather. Shanshan was surprised to see her grandfather and asked why he was at her school. You'd think she'd be grateful to him for coming to save her pathetic butt. He screamed at the bullies and told them to let go of his granddaughter. Zhang, who stood behind him, looked like he was itching to give the stupid girls a piece of his strength. The other dumb-looking guys approached Lai, and they were holding knives and bats. They told the old man not to get into young people's business and he should stop meddling in their affairs. The blonde-haired leader walked up to him with his knife, but the old man stood his ground. Grandpa Lai rushed the guy with the knife and said he was mannerless for bullying his classmates. While they tussled, someone else was about to send Lai to the pearly gates with a bat. He swung down, aiming for Lai's neck, but Zhang caught the bat and saved the man from an early grave. Can you even call it an early grave? Zhang mocked the bully for being so young and learning how to be a thug. Of course, the bullies weren't fazed by Zhang's weak looks. They saw him as another pathetic, broke guy who was trying to act tough and assumed he was Shanshan's little brother. With one kick, Zhang sent one of them flying through the air like a frisbee. Thanks to that, the bullies took him seriously and said that he must have been trained, so they decided to gang up on him together. Their silly tactics didn't rattle Zhang, as he kept a serious look on his face. The idiotic bullies had no idea what they were in for. After circling around him, the one with the bat rushed and swung his weapon, but Zhang quickly ducked to avoid the attack. Thanks to his enhanced strength, his reflexes were off the charts as well. He grabbed the idiot by the collar and tossed him to the ground with one hand. That one quickly got his lights knocked out as his head slammed into the ground. The last one rushed Zhang with his dagger. Zhang weaved through the attack and kicked the fool to the ground, nearly sending him 6 feet under. After he was done dealing with them, the girls started shaking in fear and asked him what he was going to do with them. They thought they were about to get defiled, but their milk jugs just weren't Zhang's type. He slowly walked towards them and started smacking them around the place. He slapped one of them, and she couldn't believe that he would raise his hands on a woman, but to Zhang, she wasn't a woman. She was just an ugly gorilla who liked to bully others. The other one got her hair pulled, and she screamed for Zhang to let go of her. He suddenly pulled out a knife and held it to her neck. Tears filled her eyes, and in a shaky tone, she asked him what he was about to do. He quickly swiped the blade across her neck and gave her a befitting end. Zhang had a devilish look in his eyes after what he had just done. Shanshan and the other bullies couldn't believe their eyes. They didn't think he could have done something so horrid. Anyway, just to let you guys know that he didn't actually kill her. Yeah, I got you with that one. The girl knelt on the ground and cried out because Zhang had cut her hair. Any more cuts, and she would have been looking like a bald freak. To her, it was the worst possible fate she could have imagined. She yelled out in a thundering rage at Zhang, cursing him out and saying that she wouldn't forgive him for daring to cut her hair. Zhang looked down at the fool as if he were her god and told her that long hair would only drag her down. She didn't understand his words, and she was too angry to comprehend anything at the time. He told her that she would understand in a few days and that short hair might actually save her life. Just like that, he killed all hair-pulling fantasies she probably wanted to satisfy in her miserable life. With the girls dealt with, he called Shanshan and her grandfather and said that they were leaving. Shanshan was confused and asked where they were going. Moments later, they got into the car and left. In the car, Shanshan was shocked to hear that she wouldn't be going to school anymore. Her grandfather explained that there was going to be a huge famine soon, and because of that, there was no need for her to sit and listen to boring lectures anymore. They had to do their best to survive. While Shanshan was trying to understand Lai's crazy words, Zhang had a sly smirk on his face as he drove. He was most likely happy that he had secured someone he could feed his chocolate to, and he couldn't get the fantasies out of his head. On the other hand, Shanshan told Lai that he shouldn't be listening to scam calls because she thought the old man had completely lost his mind. Considering his age, she wouldn't be wrong. She argued with him and asked how much he got scammed for, and Lai tried to explain that he was telling the truth. While the two continued arguing, Zhang was just happy to have Shanshan and promised himself to protect her this time around. Then he butted into their conversation and told Shanshan that he was the one who informed her grandfather about the famine and it wasn't a scam. She was just surprised that the idiot could actually talk. Then she nervously asked who he was. Zhang introduced himself and told her that she could call him Brother Yang. Shanshan then thanked him for dealing with the bully, Sun Y, and teaching her silly bunch of stupid lackeys a lesson. Zhang told her not to worry about the fools because they barely had many days left in their useless lives. Shanshan was confused and asked what he meant, and if there was really going to be a famine. Then Zhang told her that he used the concept of famine to explain the situation to Lai's deteriorating brain. Shanshan was glad to hear that because she was sure that there couldn't be a famine in such peaceful times. But he burst her bubble by saying that it was the apocalypse that was actually coming. Now, she was even more nervous as she exclaimed the word apocalypse in confusion. Zhang claimed that the time was right and told her to check her for short videos and the news. He said if nothing unexpected happens, she should start seeing signs of the situation. Shanshan quickly picked up her phone and came across the news of someone with rabies who was biting others like a mad dog. From her phone, you could see some officers trying to hold down the despicable zombie-like person as he struggled to break free. More news came up about a strange smog, and they highlighted that it had a strange smell. Kinda like Zhang, considering that the piece of garbage hasn't showered since the beginning of this book. More screams could be heard from Shanshan's phone as people complained about getting bit by others. Her face was struck with fear. She couldn't believe the horrific events that had started to take place and thought it must have been a dream. She was completely shocked to hear Zhang say that these were all expected events and that they were signs of the beginning of the apocalypse. This idiotic girl still stupidly asked if there was really an apocalypse, even after seeing the signs on her phone. I guess stupidity runs in her family. The next day was going to be the first day of the apocalypse, and the toxic smog would cover several provinces, including Province B. The unknown toxic smog was going to affect all living creatures, and chaos would be slowly unleashed in the world. Slowly, a significant portion of humans would be turned into repulsive, brain-dead zombies, and everything would fall into ruin. People would try to run for their meager lives, but their efforts would be completely useless. Eventually, the zombies would catch up to them and turn them into a McDonald's Happy Meal, eventually turning the innocents into filthy zombies as well. Zhang said that Shanshan should obviously know what zombies were. She obviously did, But the whole story was still too unbelievable for her. Being popped out of school to being told about an apocalypse was the last thing she expected in her life. While they were stuck in a traffic jam, Jong told her that she would believe everything in the coming weeks. By then, she would cling onto his sausage like a desperate ex-girlfriend because he would be her only saving grace. Jong was pissed about the traffic jam and noticed that even the emergency lane was stuck as well. Grandpa Lai was worried, so he asked Jong what they would do if the zombies caught up to them in the traffic jam. But Jong said that it wasn't that urgent yet. But he started to think about it and the possibility of a small outbreak occurring while they were trapped there. While he was thinking about it, some crackhead driver tried to cut in front of his car. Jong blocked him but suddenly slammed the brakes, nearly sending the old man and Shanshan flying through the windshield. Jong was angry that the reckless driver was trying to cut into the emergency lane without a turn signal. He wasn't going to let the idiot get away with such tomfoolery, so he started driving like Vin Diesel in the Fast and Furious movies. The car kept trying to cut into the lane, but Jong wasn't about that life. The stupid driver pulled up beside him and started yelling and cursing him out, but Jong ignored the foolish ingrate. Lai tried to advise Jong to let it go because the idiot looked like a rich and powerful person, but Jong was ready for the worst. If the driver eventually wanted to step out and cause trouble, he was ready to beat him to a pulp. The traffic was over, and the cars finally started moving after being stuck for almost an hour. Shanshan noticed the reckless driver from before was still trying to cut in front of them, and she told Jong to watch out for the fool. At this point, Jong was enraged, and he was ready to send the idiot to the deepest depths of hell. The two of them got into a crazy road rage, and Lai begged Jong not to stoop to such a foolish level. With the apocalypse already approaching, Jong wasn't bothered about traffic rules anymore. He said that there was no need to be lenient with a stupid, reckless driver. He eventually broke free, causing the driver to nearly crash by the side of the road. The ugly fool got out of his car, cursed him out, and called the police, telling them to find the plate number of Jong's car. He was probably another spoiled rich brat who loved to spend daddy's money recklessly. He swore to get back at Jong and teach him not to mess with certain people. At nighttime, Jong got back to his new safe house. As they stepped out of the car, Grandpa Lai and Shanshan were amazed at how massive the place was. Shanshan even said the place was a bit too much. It definitely won't be when she and Jong finally get down and dirty. Jong told them to get some rest because the following days were going to be a whole lot tougher. The next morning, Jong was standing in front of his huge window while sipping a hot cup of coffee. Shanshan stepped out of her room, yawning and stretching, while stating that it had been so long she slept so well. She finally didn't have to wake up like she was at a boot camp and get ready for morning classes. Jong looked glad that she was able to rest well. I guess he couldn't satisfy his urges yet since her grandfather was still with them. He then asked to go with him so they could check out the fortress together. You'd think they'd finally have some alone time, but Lai the Great Fool just had to tag along. As they took a tour of the place, Jong told them that the walls were made of reinforced concrete and the remote-controlled gate was also made of pure steel. The only way to break through was with heavy weapons, so neither zombies nor regular humans could easily get in. He reminded them that without his permission, no other person was allowed into the fortress except the three of them. Shanshan asked whether they were going to let survivors who made it to the fortress just die like a bunch of wastes. He ignored her question and told her to follow him like a lost puppy. He explained how people's true intentions would be unpredictable during the apocalypse. Being too kind would get them swindled, and humanity's dark side would fully show itself when the events begin to unfold. They walked to the back of the building and came to a place he called the buffer zone. They were shocked at how huge the place was. We could see some lined up crates and a small building that was to serve as a shelter. Jong told them that if survivors came while he was away, the buffer zone could provide them with temporary shelter, but they would not be allowed into the fortress until he returned. Next up, he said he would take them to the food storage, which was the most important thing in an apocalypse. If they weren't able to find food, Jong and Shanshan might have to start eating themselves, not in the way your dirty mind was thinking about. He said he'd show them the areas of food that would be distributed sparingly. As he led them into the food warehouse, he suddenly stopped to look back at them. He activated his mind's eye ability to make sure that Lai and Shanshan were truly on his side. The two of them looked confused because they didn't understand what he was doing. Jiang saw two happy emojis at the top of their heads and figured it was a sign of trust. It was his first time seeing it, which meant that the old man and his granddaughter completely trusted him with their lives. Jiang brought out a weapon crate from his ring and told them that weapons were the most important thing during an apocalypse. Isn't it supposed to be food? Anyway, he told them to make sure to keep it under their control and not let it fall into enemy hands. The two of them were shocked as they picked up a shotgun and a crossbow. It was as if they had slowly started realizing how serious things were. Lai, with a stupidly dumb look on his face, agreed to keep the weapons under control. With that done, the system popped up and showed Jiang that he had completed the task, which was to reunite with Shanshan. It then told him to find and rescue his former companion, Zhang Kai. Jiang was shocked to see that the system was trying to bring him and his comrades back together. As they stood by a huge glass window, he saw a huge arrow pointing him in the direction of where Kai was. It proved to be very helpful because he was really worried about how to find his comrades. While he ran out, he told Shanshan and Lai to remember everything he had told them and not to violate his instructions. Shanshan asked where he was rushing out to, and he said to recruit more people to strengthen their team. Somewhere in the city, at a KTV building, a group of ugly-looking guys were enjoying a karaoke session, and their table was filled with a crazy number of drinks. Two of the guys stepped out to go to the restroom. The fatso had to guide his gray-haired friend, who was probably too drunk to walk straight. He told his friend to eat slowly and not to choke. I hope it's not what I'm thinking. The gray-haired dude then told his fat friend that he would pack something for him to take back. It's definitely looking too suspicious between these two. When they were done with whatever the hell they were doing to each other in the restroom, they started heading back to meet up with the rest. The gray-haired guy mistakenly bumped into a girl who was walking with her man. He apologized, but the stupid man, feeling like it was a good time to show off his foolishness, kicked him and told him to watch where he was going. The gray-haired dude flew through the place, and his friend, who had never spent a single day in the gym, came to check if he was okay. We find out that his name is Zhang Kai, the companion who Jiang was looking for. Zhang Kai's friend yelled at the stupid man for hitting his friend just for a simple mistake. The man felt insulted that a fat piece of garbage was talking back at him and said that it was rare to meet someone who dared to try such. He grabbed the fatso by the collar and jacked him up. While Zhang Kai tried to apologize for the misunderstanding, he begged the guy not to hit his friend. Some loser who worked there stepped out of the restroom and saw the commotion that was going on. He was barely recovering from an upset stomach, and he caught a cold. He tried to calm down the fight, but the man just felt even more disrespected. He was really trying hard to show off to a girl that he had probably never banged. He told the worker that his boss wouldn't dare try to grab his clothes, but here he is doing the unthinkable. The unfortunate underpaid worker told Kai and his friend to leave while he dealt with the man. The man told the worker to call his boss and questioned how they had the audacity to disrespect him. He even threatened to throw the karaoke bar out of business. Kai and his friends ran like little wimps back to their companions, who asked them if they were chased by a dog. Kai explained that they bumped into a drunk fool when they left the restroom, and the man wanted to mess them up. Luckily, they got saved by the waiter. If not, they would have gotten really bruised up. One of the guys got angry that the fatso didn't fight back, saying that their mechanical engineering class had never backed down from a fight. It was obvious that he was the idiotic musclehead of the group, and he was always ready for a fight. He said he'd make a call to gather more of their brothers to take care of the thug. The brother with a white jacket looked at him like the dude had completely gone bonkers. Zhang Kai told him to stop showing off because they were graduating in less than a year, and the last thing they needed was more trouble on their hands. He told them to enjoy the music and keep dancing. Sadly for them, the thug walked into the place with more of his retarded lackeys and the waiter, who looked like he was barely conscious. Zhang Kai and his crew were shocked to see the pitiful state of the waiter. The idiotic thug pointed towards them and told his goons to teach them a lesson. Zhang Kai and his friends got rounded up, and they were made to kneel with their hands behind their heads. The waiter, on the other hand, was seriously shaking from the pain he was in. The stupid musclehead demanded to make a call, but instead got a bottle smashed on his head for speaking when he wasn't allowed to. He started bleeding from his head, and Zhang Kai screamed his name, Chen Chong. All this was just because a foolish thug wanted to show off to an ugly girl who looked like a troll. Meanwhile, Jong arrived at the karaoke bar, but was completely clueless as to what was going on inside. The butlers at the door ushered him into the venue as he said that the world was ending and his friend still had the mind to sing. While the music was going on and the lights of the club were still spinning, Chong was bleeding from his head like a waterfall after one of the thugs smashed his head with a glass bottle. The thug still held the broken bottle as if he were prepared for another round, while Zhang Kai called out to his bleeding friend. The foolish guy who was doing all these theatrics for his ugly girlfriend asked her if she was feeling better after seeing him display the traits of a deranged idiot. He put his arms around the girl and tried to get a good feel of her arms, but she wasn't impressed by his lame heroics. The girl was more pressed about how her nail polish looked as she asked him what was there to feel better about. She told him that he wasn't even dealing with the actual person who bumped into her. The thug, with the brain of a buffoon, turned his attention to Zhang Kai. He held the broken bottle to Zhang's face and slowly approached him. The girl still showed no signs that she was the least bit impressed with all this tomfoolery. Meanwhile, Chong was slowly getting up and trying to recover from his bleeding head. Out of anger and frustration, he quickly reached for an ashtray and wanted to use it to make the thug pay for nearly sending him to his maker. He tried to smash it on the guy's head, but the other goons held him back. One of the brain-dead thugs called him a little punk and mocked him for being foolish enough to try and fight back, given his unfortunate circumstances. Chong struggled to break free, but it was no use because he was too much of a weakling to them. The thug, who was nothing but a simp, felt irritated and angry that Chong was bold enough to try and fight back. He didn't expect him to have so much guts, and he gritted his teeth fiercely in anger. As the other goons held Chong down, their leader smashed another bottle on Chong's head. Yeah, he definitely can't be coming out of this one. The wine splashed everywhere, and broken bottle pieces could be seen flying through the air. Chong was knocked out cold, and he slumped to the floor like a sinking rock. Zhang Kai and the rest of his friends were completely shocked at the horrid event they just witnessed. You could see the anger on one of the friends' faces, while the other two tried to call out to their friend. At this point, there wasn't any need for them to hold back anymore. They had tried their best to be calm and respectful, but it ended up quite bad for them. Zhang Kai and the fatso rushed towards the leader of the thugs to send him 6 feet under, while the last guy stood at the back, holding a baseball bat. On the other hand, one of the waiters was hiding in the corner and shaking like a pathetic coward. In the background, you could hear the thugs calling Zhang Kai a punk, and they were furious that he just wouldn't back down. Things got out of hand, and everyone was ready to go all out. Lao Si was told to grab one person and make sure that they never see the light of day again. While everyone was brawling and being a nuisance to the club, the waiter was in a lot of pain, and he groaned as a lot of cold sweat ran down his body. His body was shaking a lot, and you could see some purple veins pop out from his back and his forehead. It was like he was slowly having a bad mutation of the Hulk. At the same time, Zhang Kai was dishing out knuckle sandwiches to all the idiots who tried to mess with him and his friends. He swung hard at one of the goons, but the guy was quick enough to dodge, while another person was coming at him from behind. The waiter, who was shaking like a junkie earlier, now looked completely possessed, with blood dripping from his eyes. His eyes had gone completely white, he was sweating profusely, and he was drooling like a hungry beast. As he looked at the bunch of fools who were fighting, all that ran through his mind was how good they would taste once he got a bite. He roared out like a filthy beast and rushed to join the fray. Whatever caused him to mutate made him run at an inhuman speed, but it was probably at the cost of whatever was left of his brain. The waiter, who was now a mindless zombie, quickly grabbed one of the thugs and forcefully held onto him. The thug tried to break free, but the zombie displayed a terrifying level of inhuman strength. The filthy thing quickly took a bite of the thug, who was now in agonizing pain. The dumb girl, who was the cause of all this mayhem, screamed in shock as she saw the zombie take a large bite out of the guy. The thug called the waiter a dog and tried to get him to let go, but it was hopeless for him. He then called out to his guys so that they could help him. A man who was watching the whole thing couldn't believe his eyes. It was as if he had been thrown into those horror movies, and he was the side character who was completely useless. All he could do was put his hands behind his head. He opened his mouth wide and screamed, hoping for it to all be a dream. Meanwhile, the thugs were trying to hold down the zombie, but his crazy strength left them shocked. They still had yet to clock that they weren't dealing with an average human being. The zombie let go of the person he was clinging to before and went ahead to bite the other unfortunate soul. The guy called him a good-for-nothing and was surprised to see that he was really acting like a deranged dog. As the thug struggled to break free, the zombie knocked him down to the ground, while his teeth were still firmly planted into his arms. The thug was baffled at how insane the zombie's strength was because his arm was about to be completely ripped off. As the struggle continued, a hand suddenly popped out and grabbed the neck of the zombie from behind. As the person lifted the zombie into the air, we saw that it was Jong performing such crazy feats with his physical enhancements. Everyone else in the room was surprised that he could lift up a fellow human with such ease, and even with one hand. Jong slowly squeezed the zombie's neck, and his face didn't look too happy about what was going on. With blazing anger, he smashed the zombie onto the glass wall and held his face to it so that the shards could cut him up slowly. Then he turned to the rest of the idiots who had been causing a ruckus and told them to stop. Everyone else there was still freaked out by Jong's crazy strength. The man who was a snack for the zombie looked beyond frightened as he looked up at Jong. He said that the deranged zombie was as strong as a bully, but he didn't understand how Jong was able to pin him to the wall with one hand. It was as if he was also angry at himself for being a pitiful weakling. The stupid thug leader screamed out and asked Jong who he was. Rather than thank the protagonist for saving their miserable lives, this brickhead thought it was wise to yell and act like he had some use. The other pathetic goon beside him was in a lot of pain because the zombie had taken a chunk of his shoulder for dinner, and it looked like the wound had become infected. Jong ignored the idiot's question and turned to Zhang Kai. He wanted to make sure that his friend had been bitten by the monster and also make sure that he was alright. Zhang Kai told Jong that he was fine, but with a perplexed look on his face, he asked Jong why he was worried about him being bitten. Jong ignored that foolish question as well and, with a mean look, told his friend to come with him. There wasn't any time to waste, and he needed to assemble his past comrades as fast as possible. While Zhang Kai stood up to go, that idiotic simp pulled him back and said that they weren't done. A literal zombie just wreaked havoc in their midst, and his men were severely wounded, but he was more bothered about how much he had to impress some ugly girl, who he had probably never laid before. Anyway, as he was being stupid, one of his goons, who got bit on his shoulder, suddenly started coughing and complaining about his spinning head. His boss asked him what was wrong, and he thought it was just a cold, but he was about to find out how his foolishness would be the end of him. Jong had a look on his face that said he already figured out what was happening to the thug. He wasn't fazed at all, but just kept his composure and waited for the worst to happen. The purple veins began to break out of the thug's neck and head. He gritted his teeth in pain and held onto his wound, but it was already too late for him. He tried to explain that he just had a runny nose in the afternoon, but got interrupted by Jong. The protagonist asked him if his shoulder was bitten by the zombie while still holding onto the monster's neck. The zombie was still fighting to break free, but Jong had that dog in him, so he wasn't breaking free anytime soon. The thug was confused and wondered how the zombie's bite had anything to do with the way he was feeling. While still fighting the pain, he told Jong that he was bitten and asked what that had to do with anything. You could see as the purple filthy mutation was slowly creeping up from his back to his face. The fact that no one else in the room could figure out what was going on showed why they must have died like fools in Jong's past life. Jong started to analyze the whole situation and thought to himself that the thug was probably already infected before he got bitten. Now that he was bitten close to his head, he was likely going to mutate soon, since the signs had begun to show themselves. Jong dragged the already deranged zombie and was heading out, while the H-Tug leader asked him what he was doing. The others were staring at him, and they hoped that he would give a reasonable explanation for all his strange questions and actions. Jong got to the door and tossed out the mutated filth like he was a pile of trash. Then, he quickly shut the door. The zombie started to bang and claw at the door, trying to force himself back inside. Jong, on the other hand, was glad that zombies were too dumb to figure out how to open doors yet. Because of this, they were all safe in the meantime. As he dusted off his palms, he turned to the others and saw that they were all looking at him weirdly. It was obvious that they were waiting for him to start explaining himself, but Jong was taking his sweet time. I mean, it's his show, so you can't really blame the guy. His mood shifted, and you could see the killing intent spilling from his eyes. At this point, the demons of hell were scared of what this idiot was about to do. He cracked his knuckles and asked Jang Kai which one of the stupid thugs he needed to take out first. However, Jang Kai had no idea who this crazy kid was, and he asked him if they knew each other. The leader of those thugs was looking completely pissed off because he was being threatened. He rushed towards Jong, telling him that he was getting cocky, and he attempted to land a punch on the pretty boy's face. That punch looked like it was taking years just to hit, and Jong wasn't the least bit bothered by the idiotic simp. Before the guy's hand could halfway through, Jong swiftly grabbed his head and shut him up before he spewed any more rubbish from his mouth. With his Hulk-like strength, he smashed the man to the ground, knocking him out in the process. The other foolish goon who was bitten on his shoulder rushed towards Jong in an attempt to attack him. He cursed out Jong and said that he was definitely asking for it. Sadly, he was no match for Jong's Bruce Lee moves. Jong gave him a hefty punch to the nose. Now the idiot's nose wasn't only runny but bleeding as well. Jong barely used his true power, but he was able to send the guy falling straight to the ground. As the guy got knocked to the ground, Jong maintained his fighting stance like he was a character in a fighting game. Meanwhile, the goon was knocked out cold and was foaming at his mouth. His partner rushed to his side and asked why he was acting so pathetic after just one punch. His body began to shake and wiggle, which showed that the mutation had begun, but his partner had no idea what was about to go down. On the other hand, Jong was feeling like the next best thing since sliced bread, as he asked if there was anyone else who wasn't convinced and wanted to get a taste of his fists. He said that they were welcome to try. After everything, he told Jang Kai to take his friend and wait for him outside the private room. Jang Kai wiped his chin and proceeded to do as he was ordered. He and the fatso slowly lifted Chong and carried the pathetic guy out of the room. The thug leader and his goons attempted to leave as well. His lackeys carried the injured one and helped him to the door. As they got to the door, Jong told them to hold it, and he blocked their way. The leader stupidly asked him what he was doing, and the girl, who the leader was trying so much to clap her cheeks, was shocked as well when Jong stopped them. Jong told him that all the drinks must have gone to his head and made him forget his own name. He told the man that he almost got his brother killed, but the leader only looked more irritated and scared at the same time. The leader told Jong to stop spouting nonsense and ordered him to get out of his way. Jong was fed up with the buffoon's arrogance, and he pushed him back. His eyes were blank, making it look like he had gone into feral mode. The leader cursed him out and said that he was going to die after what he just did. I guess the drink really did clog his head because he quickly forgot that Jong held up someone by their neck with just one hand. Before he could get up, Jong quickly left the room and locked the door behind him. The guy got up and demanded for the door to be opened, saying he was going to skin Jong alive for being a punk. Unknown to him, he was about to face a more deadly and disgusting opponent. The goon who was bitten on the shoulder earlier had been completely consumed by the mutation. His eyes were red, and his senses were no longer with him. You could have possibly searched his eyes for a sign of himself, but there was no humanity left in him any longer. The mutated thug let out a feral roar and began looking for the closest person to feast on. His other comrades couldn't hold him down, and they were confused as to why he was acting so feral. They called out his name, Hat, and asked him what he was doing. Obviously, they were too blind to see that Hat was hungry and looking for the next best meat to devour. Jong stood on the other side of the door and listened to the chaos that ensued inside the room. The guys banged on the door and struggled to get their zombie friend off their leader, but it was only a matter of time before they became mindless monsters like him. Voices could be heard screaming for help, but Jong wasn't bothered about them. One of the workers approached Jong and nervously asked what was going on and if he needed help. Jong told the man to lock the door completely and not let a single soul inside if he knew what was good for him. He then told him to call the police and the hospital to inform them that there was a patient with the rabid flu inside the room. The worker either had his ears clogged up or he was just shocked that Jong mentioned the rabid flu. Jong's words left him frozen and frightened on the spot, and he didn't know how to process it. While he was still spacing out like a fool, Zhang yelled at him to get to it immediately. The worker responded and hurriedly brought the door keys. His hands were nervously shaking as he tried to get the key into the lock and lock the door. While he was struggling with that, Zhang left with Zhang Kai and the rest of his friends. Chong was still unconscious as they carried him and followed Zhang. The worker who was supposed to be locking the door stopped what he was meant to do because he felt troubled by the sound coming from the other side. His colleague approached him and asked why there was so much chaos going on. The worker told his colleague that Zhang told him about a guest who had the rabid flu, but the colleague didn't believe that there was actually a rabid flu. On the other hand, the worker was surprised that his silly colleague even knew about the disease. Then the two of them headed to the security room so they could check the live surveillance and see what was really going on. They ran through the hallway as quickly as they could, but when they got to the room, they saw the horrors that had been unleashed. The security man who was watching over the cameras couldn't even believe what he was witnessing. Their ugly faces showed that they couldn't stomach whatever the hell they saw on the screens. The security footage showed that the thug leader and his goons had all been turned into brainless zombies. They feasted on each other, and the leader was finally able to get a taste of his girlfriend. The girl lay dead on the floor, and her eyes looked like she had also gotten infected with the disease. The workers quickly called for the police, but I wondered if they were calling them to become part of the feast. Meanwhile, Zhang and his friends had finally gotten outside to where he parked his car. He told them to hurry up because the club wasn't safe anymore and things were about to get way worse than they already were. They got into the car and quickly drove out that night to somewhere safer. Inside the car ride, Zhang Kai thanked Zhang for saving them and asked him who he was. Chong was still knocked out like a light, and the others were eager to know who Zhang was as well. Zhang introduced himself and told them that he was hired to protect them, and that they didn't need to know who the employer was. They just needed to be grateful that he bothered himself to save weaklings like them. One of the guys seated at the back asked Zhang if the rabid flu was actually real since rumors from the internet had debunked it. Zhang turned back to answer him and completely abandoned the fact that he was driving. Maybe his powers also gave him eyes at the back of his head. Anyway, he acknowledged the idiot's stupid question and asked him if he thought everything that they just witnessed back at the club was all an illusion. The second-hand Choji realized he was telling the truth and nervously asked if there was any cure for the said flu. Zhang told him that the disaster wasn't about to go away anytime soon and the world was already at its wit's end. It was only going to get worse, and they needed to be prepared for anything. They suddenly heard someone scream from outside the car, which made them confused as to what was going on. With the windows wound down, they looked outside and saw a zombie attacking an innocent civilian who was screaming for help. The civilian was convinced that it was the effects of the rabid flu that were affecting the zombies. Zhang then explained to them that the current situation was just a localized breakout. It was still on a small scale and in the early stages, and most victims were still in the incubation period. He said it wasn't going to take long before things spiraled out of control on a larger scale. If they wanted any hope of surviving, they needed to follow his orders. In unison, they all agreed to do whatever Zhang said, except for Chong, who was still doing God knows what in his dreamland. With his new comrades secured, the system popped up and notified Zhang that his task was complete, and it awarded him an extra 20 points. He couldn't wait to check out the new items in the store and further enhance himself. Bear in mind that this guy is still driving with all this going on. It's ridiculous. Anyway, he opened the store and looked at the list of items that were available at the moment. Looking closer, he noticed that a box known as the post-apocalyptic cultivator box was still there. He decided that he either had to buy it or refresh the store to get rid of it. Seeing that all the boxes would be useful to him, he decided to get all of them when he got back to his fortress. After he was done with that, he looked at his new comrades and figured it was going to be a serious issue to gain their trust. Zhang Kai and the others looked unbothered as they stared out the window, hoping to make sense of everything they had just experienced. In a flashback scene, we see Zhang Kai crying like a wimp and blaming someone who he once treated as a brother. Zhang explained that in his past life, Zhang Kai's entire dorm was killed by zombies because one of his brothers betrayed them. Zhang was the only one who ended up surviving the tragedy. Because of this, Zhang was trying to figure out who the culprit was so that they could deal with the person early on before it was too late. Later on, in an apartment in the city, we see our good old crazy witch talking with someone sweet over the phone and asking the person how things are on their end. It was probably another fool that she had managed to charm with her looks. She asked the person when the supplies they mentioned would be delivered and said she was scared to go to the market because it was so chaotic outside. The person on the phone assured her that he would send it as soon as he was done with what he was doing. Suddenly, she exclaimed when she heard a loud bang on her door. The guy over the phone was worried and asked her what happened. She said there was a crazy knock on her door, and she had to hang up. She looked through the hole and was relieved to see her friend, who was trying to suck on Zhang earlier. Qiu Jing said that she was scared to death because of the frightening knock, but her friend didn't even care to know. She just told the crazy witch that someone known as Old Liu, who lived on the first floor, was taken away that morning. They got inside the room, and Qiu Jing was shocked to hear the news. She asked her friend how that happened, and the girl told her that the police and an ambulance had come to take the person away. With a nervous look on her face, Qiu Jing figured that was why it was so chaotic downstairs earlier in the morning. Her friend was convinced that it was because of the rabid flu, and she was sure that it wasn't just useless rumors anymore. She asked Qiu Jing if Shuxing had delivered the supplies he promised, but I trust that pathetic piece of shit to be completely useless when he's most needed. Qiu Jing's friend told her that these men weren't any good for her. She told her to call Shuxing and let him know that Zhang had a large stockpile of supplies. With how much he had, Zhang was sure to become the next Elon Musk with how much wealth he would acquire. Qiu Jing asked her how she knew about this, and her friend said that she told one of her lackeys to keep an eye on Zhang the last time she got kicked out of his place. She found out that every few days, trucks would come to his fortress to deliver a lot of supplies for him. Qiu Jing looked pissed and assumed that Zhang probably knew about the pandemic in advance. Her friend persuaded her to call Shuxing and seal the deal while they still had time. She also told her to convince the desperate man to give them a bigger size of the cut when he made the money. The car speeds into the fortress, and Zhang along with his friends steps out. Zhang Kai couldn't hide how amazed he was with how large the fortress was. Zhang said that was the usual reaction everyone had when they saw the fortress for the first time. At the same time, Shanshan and Grandpa Lai stepped out to welcome them. Lai was glad that Zhang was finally back, and Shanshan asked if he was okay. Zhang told them not to worry about it because he was alright, and then he proceeded to introduce them to the new members. Zhang Kai and his classmates were then introduced, and Zhang said that they would be their companions from then on. Shanshan happily welcomed them because she felt that they were trustworthy since Zhang had chosen them to be companions. Zhang then told Grandpa Lai to show their new comrades around the area and explain the rules and regulations to them, to which Lai agreed. One of Zhang Kai's friends, the fatso with glasses, felt really nervous and said that the fortress felt like they had come to northern Myanmar. The dude with the white jacket then called for everyone's attention. He asked Zhang to give him and his classmates weapons as well, so that they could contribute to defending the fortress. The audacious request made Zhang very skeptical about whether the guy could be trusted. The guy's classmate then calls him Yiming and tells him not to be so eager to get weapons. They had just gotten there, and they needed to earn Zhang's trust first. Zhang then told them not to be worried because they would get weapons within a few days. Noticing that Zhang was still unconscious, Zhang said that they should have him checked in the medical room first since his injuries were still severe. Zhang Kai and his brothers went inside the building and proceeded to freshen up themselves. Yinaming then asked the fatso, who's known as Fourth, why he stopped him from getting weapons earlier. He said that if he hadn't been stopped, they would have had weapons by now, but Fourth was just confused. Yinaming told him that given their current situation, they were being protected, and at worst, they were practically under house arrest. Fourth wasn't pleased with his words and told him to stop talking like that because, after all, Zhang saved them. Nevertheless, Yinaming still wasn't okay with their condition. He asked Zhang Kai what his background was, to which Zhang Kai replied by reminding them that Zhang said someone hired him to protect them. Yinaming was still displeased. He wanted to know who could have hired Zhang and said that it was possible that Zhang wasn't telling them the truth. To top it off, he told them to look at the way Chang was being treated. Despite the fact that Chang's injuries were being monitored in the medical room, Yineming said that the room was more secure than a prison. He felt that Zhang might have been planning to harvest Chong's organs there and told his brothers that they needed to strike first. Fourth tried to reason with him by asking what would happen if they were wrong about Zhang, and if that wouldn't be like betraying their savior. Yineming told him that he would rather betray the world than let the world betray him. If what Zhang told them was true, he planned to take over the fortress and seize control. Yineming was too far gone in his head, and there was no going back for him. He had a sinister look on his face, while he said that besides them and Zhang, the only other people in the fortress were Grandpa Lai and Shanshan. If Zhang happened to be away, he planned to use the opportunity to capture Shanshan and her grandfather. He also said that the girl was cute and suggested that they could have their fun with her. Zhang Kai and Fourth couldn't even believe the words that were coming out of this guy's mouth. They just stood and stared nervously at him and couldn't come up with what to say. Yineming then tried to play off his sinister plans by telling them to relax because he was just playing with them. He told them not to take it seriously, but they would be wise if they did. Zhang Kai was relieved to hear that he was joking and told Yineming not to scare him like that. The apocalypse hadn't even started yet, and he was already thinking about lawless deeds. Fourth also told him that if Zhang really wanted to harvest their organs, he would have locked them up already, especially since he had guns. As Zhang Kai and Fourth left the room, Yineming said to himself that they were not worth plotting with. He said that in chaotic times, one had to be ruthless, and once he succeeded, they would become his lackeys for life. Meanwhile, in the warehouse, Grandpa Lai and Shanshan approached Zhang. Lai told him that Zhang Kai and the other had been settled and Chong was lying in the medical room as well. All the doors and windows were also secured as Zhang had instructed. Zhang thanked the old man, then told him and Shanshan to get some rest because no one knew what could happen the next day. Zhang called back their attention when he suddenly remembered something. Aside from Chong, he told them to keep an eye on the other remaining classmates of Zhang Kai because he felt there was a traitor among them. Shanshan and her granddad looked very worried as they heard that there was a possibility of a traitor close to them. Later that night, Zhang returned to the warehouse and began looking through the system's item shop. He started redeeming the supply boxes one by one, and each of them had an item that would prove to be very useful to him. From lots of food supplies to many rounds of ammunition, the supply boxes made sure Zhang wasn't lacking in any area. Zhang stood in front of the huge mountain of rewards, saying that they were pretty decent. Although it wasn't as good as spending money freely, in the upcoming resource-scarce apocalypse, the rewards were very invaluable. The next day, some flashy cars and trucks pulled up to Zhang's fortress. A man in a suit and the rest of his goons stepped out of the cars with weapons in their hands. The man was talking with someone over the phone and wanted to confirm if he was at the right address. After confirming, he said they would eat together when he got back. As the man orders the goons to break down the door, he's revealed to be the crazy driver from earlier who Zhang had a little road rage fight with. The goons started banging on the gate in an attempt to break it down, but their efforts were completely futile. One of the goons told the man that the gate was probably an inch thick and they wouldn't be able to break it down with the weapons they had. The man was infuriated and asked who would use such a thick door in a normal house. He then ordered his men to bring out the big guns from the cars. They started to slowly unload the crates, which were filled with bottles of Molotov cocktails. The goons ignited the explosives and started throwing them over the gate. Fire rained down and spread throughout every corner of Zhang's fortress. In a matter of seconds, the place was filled with smoke, and the fires were burning uncontrollably. The goons continued to throw the flames into the fortress, setting everything ablaze. Shanshan, along with Zhang Kai and his crew, rushed out to extinguish the fires before everything would be burned to the ground. She said that Zhang was right about everything he had told her. The disaster hadn't fully hit yet, but extreme situations were already happening. At the same time, Zhang and Grandpa Lai stepped out with their guns to take care of the people who were causing trouble. They approached the fortress tower to get a better view of the goons. When they got to the top, Lai told Zhang that one of the guys looked familiar as well as one of the cars. His memories clocked it, and he recognized the man as the crazy driver who had a road rage incident with them earlier. One of the assailants noticed some strange movement in the tower. Then he told their boss that Zhang and the rest had arrived. The crazy driver immediately recognized Zhang and called him a little punk. He ordered Zhang to come down and face him, or he would burn the fortress to the ground. But Zhang told the idiot that he had 5 minutes to get lost with his lackeys or else. The bunch of lackeys got angry at Zhang's words, calling him a little brat and asking him if he knew who their boss was. They were told to stop wasting time and to bring out the other 2 crates of Molotovs, which were remaining. Just then, Zhang suddenly got a new task from the system. The crazy driver and his goons were seen as a threat to the fortress by the system, and it told Zhang to eliminate them as quickly as possible. Grandpa Lai then asked Zhang what their next plan was and if they should fire a warning shot. Zhang thought the idea of warning shots was a joke. He called the guys complete gangsters and said that order hadn't been completely broken down yet, but they were already committing garrison. They couldn't care less if someone actually got burned to death. As he got ready to fire his rifle, he told Lai that leaving the guys alive during the apocalypse would only harm more innocent people and endanger them. After that, he opened fire on them. Before the gangster boss knew what was happening, his arm was shot off cleanly. He then screamed out in pain and held the wound down. Zhang, on the other hand, was upset that he missed his shot, saying that he had gotten rusty after living a peaceful life for so long. Meanwhile, the goons noticed that Zhang's forces had a lot of guns, and they all decided to retreat. The boss tried to get his goons to cover for him as they all ran towards the truck. Zhang got prepared to fire another shot and told himself to finish what he started that day because he hated waiting. He opened fire like a maniac and obliterated some of them before they could escape. The boss and a few lackeys were able to get into the truck, and he hurried the driver to kickstart the engines before it would be too late. Lai was worried that the rest were trying to escape by car, but Zhang told the old man not to worry because that was why he picked the automatic rifle. Zhang reloaded his gun and rained bullets on the jeep that was about to escape. Lai looked at Zhang as he fired the bullets and couldn't believe how proficient the boy was. The way Zhang hip fired and reloaded so smoothly was way better than how he was when he served. This made him wonder about who exactly Zhang was. The sounds of their screams could be heard as the bullets tore through their bodies, but there was no one who could save them. By the time Zhang was done, the front of the fortress was filled with dead bodies, and cars were up in smoke. After the job was done, he told Lai to call Zhang Kai and ask the rest to come out and clean up the mess. Suddenly, a thought popped into his head. Since they were still in the early stages of the disaster, he thought about letting the goons turn into zombies so that he could use them as practice for Zhang Kai and Shanshan. He then turned to Lai and told him that there was no need to rush. The old man asked if they were just going to leave the dead bodies on the road, and Zhang told him that he had other plans for them. Later on, we see 2 cars speeding down through the road. Shuxing was inside, and he asked if they were almost at their destination. Seated at the back were Qi Jing and her friend, who told him that they should arrive at the next intersection. Qi Jing was disappointed in her friend and said that every time Shuxing was around, she would put up an act. She knew what her friend was up to, but decided to play it cool. When they got to the fortress, Shuxing said he would park outside and then told Qi Jing to message him once she got inside. As Qi Jing stepped out, she told Zioya to tag along with her. Zioya was surprised that she had to follow her friend as well. Qi Jing told her that she was obviously coming and asked how else she would know the factory to go to. Zioya told her just to walk straight ahead, and she'll recognize it right away. Her shoes were killing her, and if she walked 2 more blocks, she would be done for. Nevertheless, Qi Jing wasn't listening to her silly excuses. High heels or not, she told Zioya that she was coming along as she dragged her out of the car. Zioya screamed that her phone was in the bag, but Qi Jing told her to leave it in the car because she already had her own phone with her. As the 2 girls walked, Shuxing looked at them until they got far enough. Then he picked up his phone and told the person on the line to get everyone ready. He told them to follow him as soon as he started his car. The car behind him was filled up with a lot of thugs, waiting for the right moment to give Zhang hell. Their leader confirmed Shuxing's orders and waited for the signal. Meanwhile, Zioya asked Jing why she dragged her into this. Jing told her that she was an old fox and asked if she really thought that she would fall for her silly tricks. Zioya tried to play innocent by saying that Jing got it all wrong. She got all dressed up to make sure that she could hook Zhang since he already knew about Jing and Shuxing. Qiu Jing noticed something off and got nervous as she asked what was going on up ahead. As they got closer, they saw the dead bodies and wrecked cars in front of the fortress. Zioya wondered if a shootout happened there or something crazier. The girls got scared when they noticed that the bodies were dead. Zioya suggested that they go back, but Jing was still analyzing the scene. She said that, judging by the blood, the guys had been dead for a while. Then she wondered if two groups were fighting over Zhang's supplies. She thought that Zhang didn't make it out alive, but his death didn't matter to her. All she wanted were the supplies, and she wondered if they were still there. Unknown to the girls, the trunk of the car behind them opened up, and that crazy driver was slowly crawling out. They decided to head back and let Shuxing's people handle the situation, but they were completely clueless about the guy who was slowly mutating into a zombie. Qiu Jing and Zioya walked up to the huge gates of the fortress and thought about how they would get in. They were really nervous because of how exposed they were in the open. Zioya said that they couldn't see anything inside because of how tightly the gate was shut. Seeing how reinforced and tight the security was, Qiu Jing wondered if Zhang was okay. While they were still fiddling with the gate, a voice called out to them, and they panicked. Looking up, they saw Shanshan with her crossbow, and she asked them who they were and how they knew about the fortress. Zioya said that they were friends with Zhang, and Qiu Jing told her that she was Zhang's girlfriend. Quite the audacious statement. Shanshan didn't trust the two girls, so she called out to Zhang and told him that there were two witches outside his gate. She also told him that one of them claimed to be his girlfriend, which she highly doubted. Qiu Jing was pissed off and felt that Zhang suddenly changed his attitude because he found a new girlfriend, whom she thought was Shanshan. Zioya told her to calm down and not to show any displeasure because they still had important matters to handle. She asked if Lai Shuxing would be able to handle the ambush, considering that Shanshan had a crossbow in her hands. Qiu Jing told her friend that Lai Shuxing would be able to handle it because he brought a few pistols. She was confident that he would be able to take down Zhang once the gates were open. But her expression showed that she was very angry that Zhang had another girl that he was taking care of. Zhang finally came out and questioned the girls from the top of the tower. He called them by their names and asked what they were doing at his fortress. He was obviously disgusted at their presence. Zhang quickly activated the Eye of Insight ability to check if they were really friends or foes. Zioya said that they were friends and asked if it was a bad thing to come check up on him. She tried her best to play the role of an innocent girl, saying that things were very chaotic at the time and they were worried about him. Zioya then asked Zhang if he didn't care about them anymore. Despite her attempts to act friendly, Zhang's ability already showed him that they were definitely planning to harm him. Without a moment's hesitation, he called their bluff and laughed at the idea of them being worried about him. He already suspected that Lai Shuxing was probably nearby already, and he asked the girls how many people he brought and what weapons they had. Zioya and Qiu Jing were completely speechless. They couldn't even defend themselves, and they wondered how he already knew about their plans. Before the girls could think up the words to say, Zhang fired at them with his gun, and he made it obvious that he fired a warning shot. They thought he had gone completely insane for actually shooting at them. The two girls couldn't fathom why Zhang had become so hostile towards them. Zioya tried to get Qiu Jing to speak calmly because Zhang was still the one pointing a gun at them. Qiu Jing, being an idiot, asked what there was to be afraid of. She wanted to know if Zhang would actually shoot her dead. Zhang laughed at them and said that it would be too easy to shoot them dead. Left to him, there were more treacherous things that could have been done to those girls. Their situation only got worse when they turned back because they started hearing strange noises. From the truck behind them, the mutant zombies had started slowly approaching them. Qiu Jing questioned if they were rabid flu patients. The zombies had their eyes fixed on the girls, and it was only a matter of time before they became repulsive creatures like them. Zioya wondered if the rabid flu was able to bring dead people back to life. Zhang looked at the horrible situation they were in and said that he would let the girls die at the hands of the zombies. The mindless zombies roared furiously and rushed towards the poor girls. As they dove to tackle Zioya and Qiu Jing, the girls were able to escape and started running for their lives. The girls ran as fast as they could back to Lai Shuxing's car. They yelled his name as they got closer to the car, and he wound down the windows to figure out what was going on. Tears and sweat dripped down from their faces as the zombies got closer to them. Qi-Jing yelled for Lai Shuxing to come to save her, but it was looking like it was the end of the road for them. They weren't expecting the tables to turn on them so drastically. Lai Shuxing panicked as he saw how terrible the situation was. He asked how it was possible for the rabid flu patients to have been outside the fortress at that moment. He spoke to his goons over the walkie-talkie and yelled to them that she turn around as quickly as possible. He needed to move quickly before the infection would get into his body and mutate him into one of them. The cars quickly swerved around and fled the scene. Qi-Jing cursed out Lai Shuxing for abandoning her and Zioya to the treacherous claws of the monsters. The distance between the girls and the vehicles was far greater than the distance between them and the zombies. There was no hope for them, and the situation called for desperate measures to be taken. Just when it looked like the curtains had closed on them, Qi-Jing said that she didn't want to die as she raised her handbag. She tossed it towards Zioya's legs, and the poor girl's legs got entangled in the handle. You really can't trust anyone during an apocalypse. Zioya lost her balance and fell face flat on the ground. She screamed out in pain as her face hit the cold, rough road. That was how Zioya's life flashed before her eyes. She became an easy target for the vile creatures, and they quickly piled on her before she could get up. Her eyes were filled with fear, and her heart beat so fast that it could have probably broken through her rib cage at that moment. She told the zombies to wait, but she forgot that she wasn't talking to people who could be reasoned with. Her blood was spilled, and sounds of bones being crunched could be heard as the zombies feasted on her. Her vision quickly turned red, and all she saw were mindless creatures eating her up like a McDonald's Happy Meal. In her last moments of consciousness, she looked toward Qi-Jing with boiling rage and rained curses on the girl for setting her up like that. She called Qi-Jing all kinds of names, but it did little to help her already sealed fate. Choking on her blood, Zioya swore that Qi-Jing would never die a good death. No matter how long it would take, the crazy witch would definitely get what she deserved. Qi-Jing chose to ignore all the words hurled at her as she fled the scene. You could see the cold sweat dripping from her face and the deranged look she had. Qi-Jing told herself that Zioya deserved every single thing that was happening to her at that moment. She kept repeating the words to herself in order to feel better about the atrocity she had just committed. Meanwhile, Zhang and Shanshan watched the gory scene from the top of their tower. While Zhang was unfazed by what he was looking at, Shanshan was deeply disturbed, and she couldn't believe her eyes. The system then awarded Zhang 10 points for taking care of the threats that befell his fortress. With that done, it quickly gave him a new task, which was to clear the area of the infected monsters who were lurking around his base. Shanshan then turned her attention to Zhang and was shocked that all those people had mutated into zombies just like that. The thought of it caused her mind to become very troubled, and she wondered what the future would look like if this was just the beginning of the apocalypse. Zhang remained very calm and told her that the apocalypse had officially begun, with a large amount of alien infection sources in the air. The dead who were exposed outside would quickly mutate into zombies, but it didn't just stop there. Anyone who was injured and those with weak constitutions among the living were also at a high risk of getting infected. Shanshan found it hard to grasp all the information Zhang was giving her, but she eventually understood that things were like that for them. After that, Zhang told her to call everyone together for a meeting. She looked at him and was baffled at how someone could remain so calm in such trying times. Moments later, everyone in the fortress gathered in a room. Shanshan locked the door, while others sat down and waited for what Zhang had to say. Yinming, who was obviously still very hostile, refused to sit and decided to stand while the meeting went on. Zhang then told them that they had to remain indoors for the next 2 days, except it was absolutely necessary for them to step out. He said that they had to keep the doors and windows tightly shut in order to let their bodies gradually adapt to the infection source. From his words, it seems the body is able to fight it when it's introduced slowly as opposed to when the virus takes the body by full force. Anyway, Zhang said that it would greatly reduce the risk of them getting mutated if they adhered strictly to the rules he stated. Zhang Kai, on the other hand, was very worried about his friend, Chong. From the expression on his face, it didn't look like Chong's condition was getting any better. Later that night, in the infirmary, we see Chong lying on the bed, and he looks to be in a lot of pain. Part of his face and body were slowly turning purple. This was a sign that the mutation was slowly taking over his body, and if push came to shove, they might have to send the poor guy to his maker. It had spread all the way to his arms, and the veins were really bulging out. Cold sweat ran down his forehead as he gritted his teeth and tried to fight the pain, but only time would be able to tell what fate had in store for him. A chaotic scene in front of a tall skyscraper with dark smoke swirling around its facade. People in business attire are seen panicking and running away from the building, suggesting an emergency or disaster situation, as one man shouts in distress while others flee towards a yellow taxi. Shang's a worried expression looking out of a window, shouting, "It's complete chaos out there." He's observing a tumultuous or dangerous situation unfolding outside. In a tense moment, Shangs urgently tells a woman and child, "We have to go to the warehouse tonight and bring back the remaining supplies," he instructs. "Zio Lai, you and Shui stay at home. No matter what, don't open the door for anyone except me, understand?" This suggests an urgent and possibly dangerous situation, emphasizing the need for caution and safety. Shang's looking determined and tense, is preparing to leave while the woman holds the child protectively. Shen posture and expression convey urgency. Suddenly, someone knocking on the door. Shang's face displaying a serious and tense expression as he looks towards the door. A tense moment where Shang's, with a serious expression and a finger raised to his lips, signals for silence. The woman looks anxious while holding the child close, who covers his mouth, reflecting a situation that requires them to remain quiet and alert, likely due to an imminent threat or danger. Shang's cautiously opening a door while holding a golf club, indicating he is prepared for a potential threat. Someone calls out, "Brother Ji, are you home?" suggesting he is looking for someone. Shang's exhaling in relief, saying, "Ong Tao, it's you," while still holding the golf club. His expression suggests that he was initially tense and ready for confrontation, but recognizing Yong Tao has eased his worries, indicating he found the person he was searching for and no immediate danger is present. Shang's hand, gripping a door handle, opened the door. Suddenly, Shang's is being kicked in the chest, causing him to fall backward with a pained expression. In shock and anger, he shouts, "What the hell?" Shang's being restrained and attacked by a group of individuals. He is on the ground, struggling against multiple assailants as more people rush towards him, emphasizing a coordinated assault. Shang's pinned down forcefully by one of attackers. He struggles against their grip. Yong's dressed in suits loom over him with stern expressions, emphasizing their control and dominance in the situation. Shang's in a state of shock and betrayal as he yells, "Yong Tao, what the hell are you doing? I treated you so well." His expression shows disbelief and hurt, emphasizing the emotional impact of being betrayed by someone he trusted. Yong Tao responding with a mocking smile, saying, "Say that again, treated me well in your eyes? I'm just a lackey." His defiant posture and words reveal his resentment and bitterness, as Shang says, "Do you have any conscience? Without me, would you have been able to save up for your house down payment?" Yong Tao, standing confidently and expressing his indignation, saying, "Yes, he made a bit for the down payment, but you earned enough for several houses." He demands his warehouse keys and the address. Shang's still on the ground, showing his focus on retrieving something important. Shang's lying on the ground, gritting his teeth in frustration and anger. Yong Tao with a smug expression, saying, "Still being stubborn," as he looks back, indicating his confidence in having the upper hand. In the background, the woman clings protectively to the child, both appearing worried and vulnerable, emphasizing the tension. Yong Tao aggressively grabbing the woman by her hair, forcing her to look up as he commands, "Look over here, you bastard." The woman in pain, while the child watches in shock and fear, highlighting the intense and violent nature of the confrontation. The child, filled with fear and anger, shouting, "Please let go of my mommy," as he reaches out in a desperate attempt to protect his mother. His face is flushed, and tears well up in his eyes, reflecting his emotional distress. Child biting Yang Tao's arm in a desperate act of defiance, tears in his eyes as he tries to protect his mother. Yang Tao reacts angrily, shouting, "You little brat. You've gone crazy, haven't you?" Child is forcefully thrown back by Yang Tao. The child cries out in pain as he is pushed away, while the mother watches in horror, her expression filled with shock and fear. Shang's on the ground, glaring defiantly at Yang Tao with determination and anger. He shouts at her, "Bastard, if you got guts, come at me. Leave my wife and child alone." Yang Tao standing confidently with a smirk, arms crossed, as he says, "Don't worry, as long as you cooperate, your wife and child will be safe." While Shang's, visibly angry and desperate, is on the ground behind him. Yang Tao's command, "Now, take us to your warehouse." Meanwhile, Yang Tao and his group standing confidently in the doorway, silhouetted by the light outside. They strike imposing poses, with Yang Tao at the center, exuding a sense of dominance and control as they survey the area.